Good morning, and if you joined us the first time, good morning again. Um, we're really glad that you took time to spend with us this morning looking at inquiry. This was a quote that was shared by Cindy at our first Deeper Dive workshop, and it really resonated with us, and we feel it's a strong affirmation for why teaching through inquiry is absolutely necessary. So we're a team of 4 educators from the Amphitheater School District in Tucson, Arizona, and we're really excited to share our, well, we'd like to call it an encouraging argument for embracing inquiry. You really do need to do this, but you really can do this. I am Pam Vandevort, and I'm the K-12 Science and STEM Coordinator for the district. I previously taught 8th grade science, 6th to 8th grade STEM elective, and high school biotech. But teaching is a second career for me. My first career was in biotech as a research and development scientist with a company that specializes in cancer diagnostics.
My name is,
I'm sorry, with me today.
my name is Leslie Ferre. I teach STEM and Odyssey of the Mind. I've been teaching STEM for the last 10 years from the preschool up to the middle school level. And like Pam, teaching is a second career for me as well. And my first career, I was a consulting hydrogeologist. And then we have Kyle.
Hi, I am Kyle Sutton. I teach at Wilson K-8 here in Tucson, focusing mostly on 6th grade. I've been teaching there for 7 years now. Currently, I'm finishing up my doctorate in quantum cognition, where I'm focusing on what thoughts and memories actually are.
And my name is Lauren Marlack. I am a 7th grade science teacher, as well as I teach an engineering and programming, robotics elective. I forgot what I teach. Engineering robotics elective. And this will be my 15th year teaching those things.
So we are going to be talking today about inquiry-based learning using the 5E method, which is what was introduced to us in the 5 tools workshops. And we're going to cover the what, the why, and the how. And we've decided to do a tool 0 because we've done some workshops with teachers and already sort of introducing them to these new units. And we have found that the mindset shift that's needed to switch to successful inquiry-based learning is kind of needed to be focused on a little bit more. So we developed this tool 0, we're calling it, to sort of introduce the idea that a mindset shift is needed and maybe start down that path. So before, next slide, Pam.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Sorry.
I don't know why it's not working. Oh, of course.
So before we can embrace inquiry, which is our hopefully end goal of this presentation, is we need to start from we need to be working from a common understanding of what we're talking about when it comes to inquiry-based learning. So to do that, let's look at what inquiry is not, and then compare it to what inquiry is. So this, I would say, is the most common thing, or the most common pushback we received in our workshops. And that is the idea that first thing we need to do in any science lesson is front load new vocabulary and facts. And inquiry is not about front loading new vocabulary and facts. It's about nurturing and guiding curiosity. It's not just a free play, free explore, free for all. It's a carefully planned process. The difference is that it's not teacher driven, okay? It's going to be driven by the students. It also is not unstructured. Again, it's not just like you put some stuff out, cross your fingers, hope for the best, and see where it leads. You are carefully guiding the students as a teacher. It's also not unfocused. It's just focused on something different. It's focused on big ideas and guiding questions. But when we talk about guiding the students, we're not guiding them by telling them scientific principles, scientific ideas. We are going to be matching students' findings, or actually helping the students match their findings to the scientific principles that are relevant to that understanding. It's not students being told what to think or made to memorize facts or made to memorize information. It's students reaching correct conclusions on their own with guidance, again, careful guidance from the teacher. It's not as scary as it might seem. It is fun, we think, but then after I put that in there, I thought it might be a bit of a stretch for a webinar. So let's just say it's doable at this point. And then once you do it, I promise you'll be hooked and then you'll be on board with fun. So we added quotes throughout this presentation because we don't just want you to take our word for it. We wanted to give you some ideas and impressions from sort of larger science minds than ours, I guess is a way to say it. This is probably in the running for my favorite quote. My second favorite quote, or my tied for favorite quote, is later on. But this is the big why. This is the capital S science why we need to shift our thinking on how we're teaching science. Because science, we used to teach it as facts, just like a house is built of stones. A collection of facts is not science, just like a pile of stones is not a house. So I thought that was a really elegant way to say that. So that's the big S science why. This is the more local, sort of Arizona-based why, I would say. So in Arizona, we're shifting from the previous standards, and we have shifted to the new standards. So in the previous standards, those were aligned loosely with NGSS, but the new ones are aligned much more closely with NGSS. And the previous standards required memorization, whereas these ones require understanding and thinking. And I think especially given the fact that we're looking at grade bands now and not just 8th grade science being tested or assessed in the middle school area. So, remembering all the steps of, I'm lacking, or I can't think of a good example, but basic facts that you learn in 6th grade, it wouldn't be fair to ask them to remember those facts in 6th grade, but having them show the skills and the thinking processes they've been practicing through all of middle school, that's what we're going to be looking to see now. And the previous standard covered very specific content, whereas the new standards cover whole systems and system thinking. So the old standards, to sum it up, the old standards taught science as a body of knowledge, and the new standards are going to require us to teach science as a way of learning. And when you and what that means from the student point of view is if you walked into a room, or if your assistant principal walked into your room and said, what are you doing? The students in the previous sort of non-inquiry based classroom would say, we are learning about plate tectonics. And in an inquiry-based classroom, those same students, we hope, will say something along the lines of, we are trying to find out how a reptile fossil from Antarctica got there. And so that's the why, and now we're moving on to the how. So with the way we thought we would structure this is to give an example of each of the 5 E's. One example in earth science, one example in physical science, and one example in life science. So before we do that, let's just refresh ourselves on what the 5 E's actually are. It starts in orange with engage, and then explore, explain, elaborate, and finally evaluate. And Pam will be discussing an example sort of lesson sequence for earth science, looking at how does climate change affect different biomes. Kyle will be looking at physical science and addressing Newton's laws, and Lauren will be looking at systems and living things on the life science example. So the first E of the 5 E's is engage. And at the engage level, this is where we want to awaken curiosity and give students a foothold. So Pam, could you describe the engage for earth science?
Okay, this isn't one that I've tried with students yet, but this is one I actually ran by workshops with elementary teachers this summer, and it was really engaging, and so I thought I would use it as an example here as well. So we would start by just showing this picture. This picture alone is pretty engaging, and asking students to brainstorm. What do you think? What do you think caused that hole in the ground? And just let them talk about it and discuss all the possibilities that it could be. And then follow that up with asking them, well, what information would you need to know in order to answer the question of what caused this hole? Physical science.
For the physical science, this is a great way of showing how something simple can become very, very powerful. Just here's a ball on this table. How can you make this thing move? What are different ways? What are different possibilities? And at first, you're going to get very common push-pull answers. You're going to get the kid who picks up the table, and then you're going to get more and more ideas. And this is going to allow you to cause discussion, focus kids on the ideas you want them to start wrapping their heads around. And it's going to build a common vocabulary and common understanding that you can advance on now throughout your lesson. Life science.
Okay, so for life science, what we would have is a box of Lego style building bricks. They don't have to be Legos on the table. And we would give them a little card that gives them a kitchen utensil to build. So we're going to say, you know, I'm going to give you a card that says build a spoon. I'm going to give somebody else a card that says build a fork. And they're going to build out of the same materials their object, their thing. And then they're going to look for similarities and differences. Like, can I use the same pieces to build different parts? Do the same pieces get put together in different ways to build something that could be used to do the same things or different things? And then also have them try to figure out, could those work together? Like, could I use two of them, like a spoon and a cup to stir something in my cup, or a fork and a plate to eat something imaginary off of the plate? And so it would really just be an introduction to how systems form and how systems function together, and how the structure of something changes its ability to function and to do different tasks.
So to sum up at the engage stage, what we want to do is we want to focus students' thinking into the range that we're going to be learning about. And that's where the careful planning comes in that we talked about earlier, because you want to be sure that the simple thing they're studying is going to lead them where you want them to go. You know, you want to make sure there aren't any sort of misconception pitfalls. So I think choosing a good engaging phenomenon, it takes quite a bit of time. But when you do, then you can trust the process, because in the end, science will come out of it. And you just want to make sure you don't go down some misconception, I guess, rabbit holes. And the other reason simple is better is that you really want to try and focus it in on what we sort of in our group talk about as the dinner table nugget, which is the sort of scientific idea that your middle school student is going to remember in 5 or 10 years at a dinner party and argue with confidence about that knowledge. Because I think we don't want to get bogged down in the details. We want to have some sort of basic understanding of science that they're very confident in. So after engage, you've hopefully awakened their curiosity and met students where they are, and then you're going to do an explore sequence. And since science is about modifying understanding as we learn more, this is the step where students start to codify their initial understanding, but it's not about introducing anything to them yet from science. This is where they get to tell you, this is what I understand about this. And there will be wrong ideas at this point. And that's okay, because again, we're teaching them to modify understanding as they take in new information. So Pam, could you start with the earth science one?
Sure. And this is where being carefully planned really comes into play. You're going to have an anticipatory set of answers for the questions you think they're going to ask. So in my experience in asking, what do you think this is? What do you need to know to answer this question? One of the first ones to pop up is, where is it? Where is that hole? And I was ready with the answer. Well, it's in Northwest Russia, in a region called the Yamal Peninsula. Another question that I had anticipated them asking was, when did this hole appear? When did it happen? And I'm ready to answer that with, well, it first appeared in the year 2014. Another common question that popped up is, well, are there more of them, or is this the only one? And again, I'm ready to answer that question with a picture or some data or an article that shows that there are more than one. Now, obviously, in the interest of time, I can't address every common question that was asked. These are the most frequently asked. And then we have to be prepared too. What if the kids ask a question I hadn't anticipated? What do I do then? Well, that's okay. It's okay, and it's beautiful to answer, I don't know, let's find that out together. And that is absolutely freeing, because you do not have to anticipate every single question they're going to ask. When you answer that, I don't know, let's find out together. It's very, very powerful in inquiry. Okay, moving on to physical.
For physical, they're going to now describe what needs to happen to make a stationary ball move. They've tried out different examples. This is their time for trial and error and to root out different mistakes. And then having them describe and share ideas with their classmates is one of those times where now they're starting to explore their own ways of expressing what they know and what they understand. And being able to communicate that with somebody is going to allow that person to strengthen their argument and their rationale. This is going to be their time where they get to expand on their understanding, and at the same time try to narrow in on what's really happening and what's causing this, what's the word I'm looking for, this activity. And really for this part of it, you're rooting out any misconceptions and you're focusing in together on where you want them to lead. And then for life science.
Okay, so in life science, we would have, for this explore, explain sequence of this explore, explain cycle of this sequence, all these terms. What we would do is kind of identify what they already know a little bit, kind of ask the students, what do you know about parts of our system, our body system? Have them identify some organs that they kind of already know about. And then we would do a simple card sort activity. So you'd give them names of different organs that are going to become important for where you're headed, and have them sort them into groups that work together. So say, put these organs into groups that work together. Which ones work together to do something? So they would put them all in piles, and then you give them some sticky notes and say, okay, what's their job? What's their function? What are they supposed to do? And obviously, you're leading them down the path where you're going to give them some vocabulary, but you're not going to give them anything right now. So they might say, well, it makes you do stuff. That's okay. It's okay to use the word stuff at this point. Okay. Or it makes you, it gives you energy. Okay. Or it makes you breathe. So they're just going to write down the main function in their terms of these different systems or groups of organs that they've made, and then have them look at what other groups in the other lab groups in the classroom have figured out, and then modify if they feel like they need to. Like, oh, I didn't really know what that was, so I just kind of stuck it over here in this group. But now that I see it there, I think I know what that is, or I think I can add to that function.
So to sum up, at the explore phase, we're pushing students to go a little bit deeper, maybe focus their learning a little bit. So in Pam's example, they're focusing in on how to answer a question or how to figure something out by asking questions and looking what the answers to those questions are or what information is available. In Kyle's, they're observing behaviors and then they're using their own vocabulary, their own accessible vocabulary to describe what they see. And then similarly with Lauren's, they're accessing their current understanding and putting it, starting to build it into a kind of an understanding that we want them to then map onto the scientific vocabulary. So, but I do want to emphasize at this point that it is okay for students to be wrong. There will be some misconceptions here, but that's okay. That's expected. In some ways, when they have something, they think they understand something, but the evidence doesn't support that understanding, it becomes an even more powerful learning experience. But really, you know, it's okay for students to be, I can't say it enough, honestly. It's okay for students to be wrong at this point. And that might be one of the biggest hurdles, I think, to inquiry-based learning, is to hear those things that you know are like, whoa, that is out there. And doesn't mean you can't challenge them, because you can challenge them by, you know, asking questions that are based in scientific observations. Right? So that's where I was talking about the science is there, the science is solid. And so if they bring up something that goes against what you're observing, you can say, well, can you show me how you're making that claim? What evidence do you have? You know, very informal conversations about sort of pushing their understanding. So from explore, we move on to explain. This is where we get to introduce the scientific vocabulary, and students are going to map that onto their understanding and also clear up some misconceptions. So, but I also want to emphasize that it's clearing up misconceptions is not the teacher saying, actually, that's not right, it's this. You are going to give students information, and then they're going to figure out what they got right and wrong and how they need to modify their understanding according to the evidence that's out there. So Pam, did you want to give an example of that?
Sure. In earth science, now I have to preface this by saying this would be a very, if you were to use this phenomenon, it would require a double explore explain sequence. It's way too much information to cover in just one explore, one explain. So there would be 2 cycles of this. I'm going to condense it down into one for the purpose of this webinar, but please understand that we wouldn't throw all of this at them in one learning sequence. So building upon the most common, again, explanations given in the engage, what do you think caused this to happen? So building upon that were 2 of the most common, and one was, did an asteroid hit the earth and cause that indentation? And so you want to be prepared with a way to explain that, so we would give them data. Did an asteroid hit the planet? Well, if we look at this asteroid data, which goes from basically the beginning of recorded time until recent years, we can look up at the very top of the map is the Yamal Peninsula, and you can see that there is not a single hit from an asteroid ever recorded in that region. Okay, and then the second most common guess was that somebody dug that hole. So is it possible that somebody dug that hole? Well, let's look at mining. Is there mining in Russia, in Northwest Russia? Yes, there is. But in the Yamal Peninsula itself, we don't have a typical dig a hole mine. We have natural gas, the collection of natural gas. And this is what a mine, so to speak, for natural gas looks like, which the students would then conclude, well, that doesn't look anything like the hole that was shown in the engage. So again, through 2 explore explain cycles, we would begin to give them a little bit more information and lead them to, first of all, let's look at the behavior of natural gas. Let's do an experiment with natural gas where all middle schoolers love to do, and that is make things explode or catch on fire. And we'll see some of these properties of natural gas that are in the area. And then we'll go a little step further and we'll show them climate change maps of the world, and we're taking a look specifically at the northwest area of Russia. We see that there's been a very large surge of temperature increase, and more specifically, if we look exactly where, and I wish I had a pointer on there, maybe my cursor will work, I don't know if you can, but this color is northwest Russia, and then it's right here at the top of the graph showing the largest spike in temperature is in the Yamal Peninsula area. Okay, so that would be, again, to explore explains. Okay, moving on to physical.
So for physical, the students have come up with these different ideas of moving this ball, come up with explanations and ways of trying to define it in their own words. Now in this part in explain, this is where you're going to clarify that and give them a little bit more detail, especially with Newton's laws now. I want to make sure I point out that just because the teacher can start giving a little bit more information and defining things now, this isn't a lecture. This isn't the time where I'm just laying things out for them. This is the time where I am focusing them in on these Newtonian laws, how they work, and how is that these basic laws affected what they saw, and then what they have learned so far and how to define. So now they can start putting their concepts into more specific terms of what's happening, action, reaction. And there might be some times where they're not using specific vocabs that Newton used. And that's fine. That's where you can start bridging that gap and making sure that the understanding is there. So the students can start building from that concept and compare from other groups about how these laws work and actually function. Because a idea of something like a force isn't necessarily an e-concept for anyone to come up for a definition of their own. And that's one of those times where a teacher can instinctually, well, let me just give you the definition of what a force is. But that's what we're working away from. So now is the time where the students are getting enough information, enough understanding that they can understand these more advanced ideas like what is a force and be able to find it and understand it. And now we have not just given them a definition, they understand the idea, the concept. And that's something that we can start building from more throughout the lesson as well. Since they have their understanding and their practices, and now they can start building that depth of knowledge that we're looking for. Can they explain why this ball is moving and why it would stop when it hits net or an object? Or can you start changing scenarios here later on and see if they can still apply it? And then for life science?
Actually, can I cut in here for just a minute? And what you just said is, can they explain? And that's the part I left out of mine. Woo, just gave you all the data and we didn't ask for the explanation. But that would be the end of the second explain is, can you put all of the puzzle pieces together to explain what is causing these craters in the Yamal Peninsula? And teachers were able to do it. I believe students would definitely be able to do that and put together that as the climate is changing, that tundra is warming up and pockets of natural gas are exploding, causing these craters. And it's really not that difficult to put all those pieces together and come to the correct conclusion. So sorry for the jump in. Let's move to life science.
Okay, so in life science, now we're going to start to, again, give them the actual information, right? The actual information, which basically just means we're going to start tying what they think to what they can find to support that thinking, right? And that's what I think kind of was my biggest shift was, this is where it feels at first like, oh, well, now here's where the teacher actually jumps in and starts teaching. We're not really teaching in the same sense that we were before. Instead, we're kind of, like we said, connecting that information together, guiding the students to the information. So in this case, what we would do is we would kind of have them go on a scavenger hunt for the different body systems to see which ones are made out of different organs and which organs function together and what their tasks are that they complete. And then they're going to create what we call a body system flip book, where they're going to use different images that are all the same size to kind of label the different parts that are important in each body system, and then what the main function of that body system is that they can kind of flip back and forth between. And then they're going to use that to start looking at what would happen with our overall body if one of those systems wasn't doing its job. So if one of those systems wasn't functioning, what would happen overall? Kind of like if we take one of the parts out, what would happen to the overall function, and how would that translate across the system?
So summing up again for explain, that this is where students are modifying their understanding with new information that we as teachers present to them from the scientific community outside of our school. And they're going to be modifying what they understand from what they are learning and discovering. So it's not what they're being told, it's what they are learning. So I wanted to talk a little bit briefly about what that might look like. So with Pam, if you had a student who is completely set that it's an asteroid, right? The teacher, instead of saying like, well, actually look at this map, see, there weren't any asteroid strikes in that location, the teacher's going to help the student locate the place on the map. The teacher's going to say, so can you tell me how many asteroids have been in that area lately? And then the student hopefully will go, oh, that's the sort of magic sound of inquiry I often find. In Kyle's example, students, in their describing of the words, they're going to all basically, when they talk about how they made the ball move in the explore, they're going to need to use an action word, right? And so they already knew this. They already knew that if you don't touch the ball on the table, it's not going to go anywhere. And they had to push it or pull it. And push and pull, those are force words, right? So they just don't know that that's a force. So they already know all that, all the ideas. They just need to be able to they need to be shown how to describe it in the scientific vocabulary. And with Lauren's, what I wanted to emphasize is Lauren's really touched on the idea that we're looking at not sort of single facts and pieces of information, but more bigger ideas, right? So that our bodies are these systems of interdependent things, right? Which, because her Engage was so beautiful, they learned, I can't eat my peas well without a spoon, for example, right? I need a spoon and a plate to eat my peas. So they've already experimented with the idea of things need to work together to function sometimes. So after explain, and either one explore explain cycle or two explore explain cycles, but you do always want to do an explore and an explain together, because the explore is where you expose students to stuff and they make observations, collect their own data, create their understanding or give you their understanding. And then in the explain, that's where it becomes more codified and slightly more formal and quote unquote scientific. So in the elaborate is where we want to offer new experiences that challenge the new understanding they've constructed. So this, they have it, maybe if you think of it as a picture, they have like a general picture, and this is going to help them focus the picture and sort of like test it.
So moving back to earth science, we might stretch them by saying, okay, we've looked at a really cold and a really wet environment that's being affected by global warming. How would that affect climates that are already hot and dry? What kind of impacts would it have there? And so it's just taking what they've already been thinking about and analyzing and maybe looking at differently than they have before, and applying it to a situation that is basically opposite from the one they just worked and processed through. Okay. Physical science. And Kyle had sent me a message saying his audio was dropping out. So if we can't, Kyle,
I think I got you.
Oh, you got it?
Is it my
Okay.
turn now? I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
So I'm having a little audio problem. I'm working on it, but can you guys hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, then that's the important part. So for the elaborate for the physical part, now that the kids have used this vocabulary that they're understanding, they have been introduced to these ideas of Newtonian force, or the Newton's laws and forces. Now they're going to start putting them together. Can you take what you've learned, combine it, use it in a way that they are using these things together? And I kind of wanted to point out too that, because this is a common question or common things that come up, is, and the elaborate is a fantastic time where you can start differentiating for the students. This is where your higher kids who are grasping these ideas, you can expand on. Kids that you can tell they're having misunderstandings, this is the time where you can stop and correct those and make sure that they are fully grasping what you want here. So this is really the time where, kind of like what the name suggests, they get to elaborate on their understanding and get to show it to you. So this really is a good time to check in. And really, when you're using these forces, it's a great time to see if they can apply this to a task, into a simple task. Can you see their understanding? So this is a time where you might use different methods to collect and have the students show you what they know. Because especially with this, with forces, there's so many different ways to apply it and use this in teaching. So it's one of those where I want to encourage people to try these different ideas to see, okay, can you have these objectives? Can you have this ball move? Can you have push and pull and equal force and make something stop? So now they're applying this and you get to see that understanding. And then for life science.
Sure. So in life science, what we're doing is we're kind of stretching a little bit. So we just came off of talking about an explore, explain loop to look at a very complex system, right? Humans are very complex systems. So now we're going to kind of stretch a little bit and say, do all living things have complex systems? So we're going to kind of go through a Xeno 504 and look at this living thing, right, that doesn't have a complex system. And what they're going to do is kind of argue how this thing might still use, right, this living object, how it might still use systems in order to function, and how it might also not use systems in order to function, right? So kind of looking at both sides to make sure they understand how the structure of something leads to its ability to function and how systems work. So if they can apply that, then they understood everything we did with the body systems and anything else you did in our unit. And this unit, we will also have had an explore, explain sequence looking at plant systems.
So summing up, you know, we talked about the idea that elaborate is where we offer students new experiences that challenge their understanding. And there, you know, we tried to show different ways of doing that. So Pam's example was to go to a new location, and Lauren's example was to give a new scenario of something of a different kind of organism. And Kyle's is more looking at the interplay of forces. You know, I think one thing that popped into my head listening to Kyle was, so if I'm pushing on something, but it's not moving, what does that mean? I thought if I push on something, it's supposed to move. Ah, it must mean there's some other force acting on it, because it's if the sum of the forces is 0, right? It's not going to move. So finally, the last E, your 5th or 7th E, is evaluate. And this is where students get to show you the new skills that they've just been practicing, and they have to figure something else out. And so I've been thinking lately, and Pam, I'm going to throw this at Pam and Kyle and Lauren without any warning, but to me, the elaborate seems a little bit like, if we're going to use old school parlance, is like the guided practice, and the evaluate is the sort of whatever the last one is. See, I should have studied my old terminology, but sort of the elaborate is like a little baby step into the unknown. So you make sure they've got all those skills organized. And then the evaluate is maybe you're jumping into the pool completely. You know, man, that was like 7 metaphors right there. Sorry. So students are going to showcase what they know, but they're not going to be able to rely on memorization and facts, right? So that's where the challenge comes in the evaluate. Pam?
Yeah, for this, I would give I would turn them loose. Okay, now you're in the rainforest, which is, again, a completely new scenario. You've had a chance to look at climate change in cold and wet, in dry and hot. How about warm and rainy like the rainforest? And show me what you know. What do you think would be going on there? So it'd be a great chance for me to see as a teacher, are they getting it? Are they getting the concepts? Are they understanding all of the nuances that we want them to have in relation to the concept of climate change affecting a biome? And this is a one we've talked about before, that we can extend it as necessary or shorten it as necessary. If everybody's got it and we're ready to move on to the assessment, that's wonderful. But if we're, again, catching last minute misconceptions, catching last minute misunderstandings, this is the great place to do that, where you can slow down and revisit all of those concepts and reapply them. Okay, moving on.
For physical science here, and I know it's kind of hard to see that picture, so I'll describe it to you, but in this evaluation, you're trying to see, can they actually interact then with these objectives, with these forces, knowing the Newtonian rules. There we go. Thought I lost you guys for a second. So applying what they've learned, can they achieve? And this is where, well, if they can perform this task, and they needed to know all the information, the forces and Newtonian laws beforehand to achieve that task. This is where setting up the prior lessons, if you have them being able to achieve these tasks, then in this evaluation, they're going to display all of that to me. And then in life science.
Sure. So in life science, what we would do to kind of wrap it all up is we would have them apply their understanding in kind of a novel way in order to create an analogous body system. So they're going to make an analogy to one system, whether it's a plant system, animal system, simple system, complex system. They're going to take one system and create an analogy to something unrelated to living things. And then they're going to create an interactive exhibit for a children's museum. So they're going to create a way to show that they understand all the parts and how the parts function and work together in a different way than just parroting back the parts of the digestive system or respiratory system, etc.
So just to reiterate on the evaluate, you're not introducing any new ideas here. You're not having students learn any new information. You're going to evaluate and give them a chance to practice what they know how to do. But you need to make sure that what you choose as your evaluate, students can't rely on memorized facts. Okay, so it's what I love about Lauren's example, because you could easily memorize the parts of the digestive system, and if you're a visual learner, even have them labeled properly on the diagram and not have a sense of how they work together at all. But if I have to, build one out of Lego, then I need to understand the role of each part of the system. So as we mentioned before, I think, we've presented our units to some teachers in our district. And through that, we have encountered what we're calling the frequent freakouts. So we thought we would start by addressing those and then open it up to questions if these frequent freakouts don't cover your your questions. So the first one we're going to talk about is the pushback we got, which was forceful at times, I will say. But I can't teach them that yet because they don't know about density yet. So for example, if you wanted to do something like in Kyle's lesson where you were moving objects that have different mass and looking at the different forces that are needed to move an object of a different mass, then you could say, and you wanted to use density cubes because they're genius for that, right? Because they're the same size, they just have different masses. So you've eliminated all the other variables. But a pushback in that scenario could be, but they don't know what density is. So why would I give them density cubes? So it's okay, because what they do know is that if something is heavier, you're going to have to push it harder, right? And that's what we want them to access first. We want them to access their intuitive understanding first. Pam?
And admin related concerns. Your classroom is going to look different. You might not be displaying your guiding question on the board. You may not be able to put all of the information on your board for an administrator to walk by and check off on a checklist. Your room is going to look different. And some of the ways, because with inquiry, we don't want to give away the answers, and sometimes those guiding questions do that. So we talked about different ways that we could still meet requirements, but also train admin to look for different things. And some of the things we talked about were maybe displaying on the board which science and engineering practice you're currently using, or which cross-cutting concept you're using, or both. Or perhaps you put on your board which of the 5 E's you are going through that day. The other thing is that learning is no longer quiet. The traditional sit and get, where everybody is quietly working on their own, usually with paper and pencil or computer, those are days of the past. And so your room is going to be active learning, and active learning is moving, and active learning is collaborating, active learning is speaking. They're up and out of their seat. They may even be up and out of the classroom, even sometimes up and out of the building and outside. But this is all normal for inquiry-based science learning. Okay.
So the next one is, how will they know if I don't tell them? And this is something that as soon as we say it, everybody goes, yes. Because as soon as you tell me, well, you're not going to tell them this, and then in this part, you're still not going to tell them, and in this part, you're still not going to tell them, you're going to guide them, but not tell them. That makes everybody's shoulders scrunch up. So I think that the biggest way around that is they're going to know because you're going to lead them there. Okay, that's what inquiry is. It's guiding them through their curiosity, because inquiry is to gain new knowledge. The end result of inquiry is they learned something new. They can't learn it on their own, or they would have already learned it. So you have to guide them, and you have to give them things at their level and at their pace. But how will they know if I don't tell them? It's because it's taking away a lot of the ownership from you. It's putting the ownership on the students, and that's scary. But it's also so powerful. And that's something that I had to just kind of jump in and try. I was like, okay, I'll give it to you. I'll try it your way, even though I'm not really sold that it's going to work. But it does. It does work. And after you've done it a couple of times, you'll really feel confident, I think, and really strong in that. And what kind of goes along with that is pacing. So what about pacing? How long is it going to take me to do all of these cool things you say are really cool and the kids are going to get so much out of? And the answer is it's not set for every person. Everybody's not going to get through it the same way in terms of teacher to teacher, or in the same school. If you're teaching at the same time, you might not be at the same part at the same time. And that's okay. The pacing has to be, again, very, very regimented by you in terms of how long do I let them struggle with something? How long do I let them investigate or kind of play with something? But you also have to be open to changing up your pacing a little bit if the kids are going down the path that you need them to go down, right? Don't let them go off on a tangent forever, right? That's teaching 101, right? Don't let them go off on the tangent forever. But if it's getting you to your end result, then take it, then go with it. And pacing is something that's going to take a little while as we all learn how to teach these new standards in this way, right? It's going to take us a few times when we're not also switching where we're teaching from, but it's going to take us a few times before we all get it. So our answer is we don't know exactly how long it's going to take to teach any one of these things, but we do know that we're pretty confident we can get through it in a school year.
Kyle?
Okay, he may be having difficulties again, so we can step in with.
Are we on Will I Lose Control?
Yep.
All right,
Yep.
all right.
You're up.
So will I lose control? And sorry if I repeat anything, I'm having a hard time hearing you guys. But this is a common kind of question, is when they start hearing that this is student-centered and the learning and ownership of the education's on them, teachers kind of will think right away, well, if I'm giving them all the ownership and control, then I'm going to lose it and they're not going to stay focused. And that is not the message or how this works at all. Especially with inquiry-based learning, you're having active learnings and it's very task-based. So you're kids are going to be more on task and focused than usual. They are going to be invested in what you have created for them and want to rise to those challenges. And that's when you get to be more of a facilitator role. And that means, no, you are not losing control at all. You are actually just letting the students run their own learning, and you're playing that role of guidance. You're going to guide them more. So it's just kind of changing the role you might play in your classroom to not be so over involved in making sure that you are forcing this learning on their own pace, that now that they can do this on their own, that you are being the person that is that facilitator.
So we're running low on time. So Kyle, can you briefly touch on where will I fit in what I usually teach?
So I'll go fast then for the next one's going to be where will I fit it in if I don't, where will I fit in what I usually teach? And that's the simplest answer is follow the standards. That's one thing I think every teacher has to get used to with this, that the standards have changed. Some of the old ideas, concepts, and things that you might have taught and methods you've taught in the past, check with the standards. If it's following the standards and it follows the flow, then you're more than likely on a correct path.
And the last one is, but what if I don't know the answer? And Pam already touched on that one, but I just want to reiterate. I mean, that's peak inquiry, and that's the most exciting thing that can happen, because that's your student being curious and thinking of things that you didn't. And the good news is that you do know how you would find the answer, and all you have to do is help them through that process, the same process that you would use. We did have a question about remote learning ideas. I would say my answer on that is right now, no, we don't, because like everybody else, we're playing catch up with what it's going to look like come August. I will say that, inquiry needs to be interactive. So, paper packets, I hate to say something's not going to work, but I don't think you could teach inquiry through paper packets, because the time between when a student puts an idea on the paper and gets your feedback or gets your questions back is a bit long. But anything online that's interactive will be at least a step in the right direction towards inquiry. That's how I would answer that question, but I would see if anybody has anything else to add to that.
We're all learning that part together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Through inquiry.
Yep.
So another question was, do you include a paper pencil assessment? Not always is how I would answer that question. Lauren, do you want to add on that?
Sure, absolutely. So that's another big shift, right? Because where's the quiz? Where's the test? I think anymore it's performance-based assessment. That's what we're switching to. That's what the Arizona Science test will be. The AZSci test will be. It will be a performance assessment. It will be paper, pencil in a lot of regards, but it's going to be more in depth. So we've started writing our performance assessments for our unit. If you were in the previous webinar, you can see those after they get evaluated. But we're still in the beginning sessions of that. So I think that's something that you'll just have to kind of keep working on and going from. You're going to need to assess them formatively all the time, right, as you go. And then at the end of your unit, you will have a performance assessment that goes along with each learning sequence.
Any other questions? I feel like we need the Jeopardy music. Okay, so this is tied for my favorite quote. I'm just going to read it. I'm loath to read quotes, but here we go. The fundamental essence of science, which I think we've lost in our education system, is poking something with a stick and seeing what happens. Embrace that process of inquiry. So I encourage everybody to go out there and start poking stuff with sticks.
And that concludes our presentation. If you would like to contact any of us, you can do so through me. My contact information is at the bottom of the screen, and any of us would be happy to speak with you more and answer any questions that pop up afterwards or later. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Savea.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So again, I want to thank Leslie, Kyle, Lauren, and Pam from Amphitheater for really sharing their learning experience today with the